is tied back to Senate Bill 5, and it deals with the provisions related to what our public union employees are able to do and not do. So I'm not going to give his speech. I'm going to let him do that, because he can do it much better than I can. John.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ken. And, fiscal responsibility, limited government, and free markets are concepts that don't get old. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same thing about my eyes. I have to wear my glasses, all right? And I want to thank Ken and Nancy, Chuck and Nancy for having me to speak here in Lake County. I've given this talk both in Geauga County and around various places, and generally speaking, I find that people appreciate the prospects of getting some real facts and some real understanding about what issue 2 is about. And before I go too much farther, in view of the fact that Judge Lucci is here, I feel compelled to say, may it please the court. I'm here to speak in favor of issue 2. Senate Bill 5 is a sweeping piece of legislation that's designed to return to our elected officials and ultimately to us citizens the ability to manage the affairs of government efficiently and within the bounds of the citizens' willingness and ability to pay for it. If we want Senate Bill 5 to become law, we have to pass issue 2 in November. Senate Bill 5 is some 300 pages long. Page 1. No. We're not going to review it page by page, and that's a two-sided copy there. It's, right. We're not going to review it word for word. What I'm going to try to do is to share some thoughts with you on why we need to pass issue 2 and make Senate Bill 5 the law of Ohio, and explain to you some of its major components and the changes that they would bring about. And in the process, I'll give you some of my thoughts on why they are appropriate changes and why they are helpful, and hopefully dispel some of the more wild-eyed rumors that you will probably hear, if you haven't heard them already, about things people say against it. What I think you'll find is that it's reasonably crafted legislation that's designed to achieve some valuable benefits for all of Ohio. Most importantly, what I hope you'll take away from this is some talking points that are based upon fact that you can share with your friends and colleagues who are interested voters, so that that buzz that's going to be necessary in order for us to pass issue 2, in fact, gets going and people become educated. And I think you can all basically become, serve a substantial purpose in favor of issue 2 if you'll help become educators of the voting public. I have on the back table some bullet points. It's a one-page item that highlights some of the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight. Let me start with why we need Senate Bill 5. In 85 out of 88 Ohio counties, the school districts are projecting huge aggregate deficits by 2015. By the Buckeye Institute's count, those deficits are going to be over $100 million in 19 of the Ohio counties. And in 74 Ohio counties, those deficits aggregate will be in excess of $10 million. We cannot afford to operate our government that way. We cannot afford something so critically important to the history of this state as the education of our children to be run in the red. We cannot have it any longer. Secondly, we need to attract to Ohio and retain in Ohio the next generation of best and brightest public employees. Third, I believe, and I suspect that you believe, that fiscal decisions are more likely to be sound when they are made locally and made by public officials who are accountable to the people. And fourth, no one should be allowed to deprive the people of the protection of their health, safety, and welfare. Now, that last point might make this sound like an anti-union bill and an anti-union issue. And I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, it is nothing of the kind. Let me say this about the labor movement in this country. If you study it back far enough, it's been essential to the United States' progression as the world's leading economic power. In the private sector, collective bargaining and the right to strike have been important tools workers have used to resist real and potential exploitation by management and sources of capital. A strike is an economic tool that unions use to hurt the shareholders of companies, the owners of companies. When the United Auto Workers, for example, strikes, cars don't get made, and the people who own the car maker don't receive any kind of a return on their investment, and it hurts them. It's intended to hurt them. The public, in that situation, may be inconvenienced, but if someone wants a car, they'll find a way to get a car during the strike. They generally can get one from inventory, they could buy a used one, or they could just make do with the one that they already have. But when public unions strike, the people aren't being deprived of something they can do without. They're being deprived of what should be the essential functions of government, those which society deems to be necessary for ordered liberty, for the protection of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And generally speaking, when those services are deprived of the people, they can't get it somewhere else or otherwise make do. So there's a significant distinction between striking in the private sector and striking in the public sector. If a private sector union successfully increases its employer's costs, what is that employer going to do? Pass them on to the consumer. And when those prices are passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices, the consumer can decide whether or not they want to buy those products at the higher prices, or buy them from a non-union organization, or make do with what they have and not buy them at all. But when the public sector union successfully increases the public employer's costs, the result is ultimately one of two things, because the public employer is going to do just what the private employer is going to do with it, aren't they? They're going to pass it on. So either taxes are going to be raised or services are going to be removed. And that is a bad situation in a public sector, because you are then forced to pay taxes that you were never asked to act upon in advance, or you're forced to be deprived of public government services that you had no say-so in whether or not they should be provided. And that is not right. Senate Bill 5 and a yes vote on issue 2 will help to reduce the power that labor now has to force higher taxes on taxpayers. Simply put, it can enable our government at all levels to align the costs of government to what the people are willing and able to pay in taxes, instead of it going the other way, which is the cost of government goes through the roof and the taxpayers are called upon to pay for it irrespective of their wishes. Now, rather than talk in great length about what the law is now and all of the elements of what are going to change, I'd like to highlight for you some of the picture of what labor and employer relationships would look like under Senate Bill 5, resulting from a vote of yes on issue 2. And I'm hoping what you'll gather from this as I go through it is the reaction that I had when I started studying this, which is for each of those points I said to myself, you mean it doesn't already work that way? And the answer is, no, it doesn't already work this way. But let me tell you how it will work